Hi there RC enthusiasts, this is John Foster and we're going to start the building of this fabulous Scania R620, which is a 6x4 Highline. This is going to be quite a large build and looking forward to this very much. So we're going to first of all go on to the first steps, and I think the first steps, if I remember rightly after studying the manual for a little while, is perform your servos and your centralizations, which I have done. So I've performed the servo, done that one, and I'm now on the second half of this, which is placing the steering servo. So I've neutralized this one and I've put a ST for steering, and on this one I've put an SF for shift, and we need to put the servo savers on both the steering and the shift servos, which I've now done using the appropriate connections for the servo horn. So I've now completed the steering servo and following the drawing, making sure my horn is as straight as it can be according to the drawing here, with the little ball connector on. So that's the steering one, and the same again for the shift servo, and you can see here trying to get this as straight as I can. So I'm assuming there's a bit of adjustability here for later on. So there we are. So they're the neutralized and now have their servo horns on, and they're going to be ready for the next stages. We are on now step 2. For step 2, we need some screws from each of the screw bags. So from the additional bag of BC, you need this 3x8mm self-tapping screw. From the main bag A, you need 3 of these flanged self-tapping screws, which are 3x10mm. And from MA7, which are again from the main parts bag A, we need the 3x8 flanged self-tapping screws. We need the C4 parts from parts tree C, and we need some parts from the parts tree Q, which are Q6 and Q2 and Q8. We also need our steering servo and our shift servo from step 1, and we need to install these onto these servos. We'll do the steering servo first, getting the orientation of our servo correctly. Pop that into place and then screw that tight. Again, don't have to go too mad. And then we're going to take our Q6 part, again making sure the orientation is correct, making a note of these recesses, and then we screw that through from the other side, like so. That's that one, and we pop that into the other side of the C4 part, and that mounts the servo, steering servo in this case, onto its bracket there. So there we go. So now you have the steering servo mounted. Again here, we need to make sure we get the orientation of the Q8 part and the orientation of the shift servo. Making note of the horn, that one. And the other side. Again, making sure the orientation is correct. You've got this section here, and you've got this section here. Making sure that goes in correctly. Again, using the MA7, that's in there, and the last remaining MA7 goes on here to collect the hole that's inside. There's a hole that sits between the two, the Q parts, the Q2 and the Q8, and you collect that there. There we go. And like so. There we are. So there we are. The shift servo is now mounted on its corresponding Q parts. And step 3 is quite a busy step here. We've got the 2 chassis rails and components to put on each side. And so for that, we need some parts as from the bag. Also for step 3, you need some parts from the parts trees. You need from parts tree G, you need G6s. You also need G2s. You also need G10s. And from parts tree C, you need C5s and a C15. So we'll add those into all the plethora of parts for this step, and we'll start putting this together. So, busy step, and we also need the thread lock, which they kindly give. There we go, thread lock, there we go. So, busy step, putting this all together. So this is step 3 completed now, and a couple of areas just to make sure that you're aware of is that on the right of the chassis rails, you've got this C15 here at this part, and you need to just make sure you put the thread lock on the screws that are going into the metal pieces, the outriggers and things. And on the left hand rail, you don't have the C15 part, but you also need to make sure that the MA29, which is the one with the single, if you can see the differences here, they've got a single loop here and these have got 2. So you need to make sure that's on this side, and the shackles are down there, and again thread locking into the metal areas. So other than that, that's all the parts put on for step 3, and we now move on to step 4. Right, we are. So we are now on step 4. Step 4, we need some components from the components tree, namely C1 and C2, which are these 2 components here. There you go. So that's C1 and that's C2. We also need D2 and D3, which are these 2 here for the cross. These are cross members. We also need a C20, which is this little fellow here. We also need a Q9, which is this guy, fuel tank, and Q14, which is this little chap. And we also need BC3s from BC bag, BC3s, which are the 3x8mm self-tapping screws. So step 4 is just really screwing these plastic parts together. Nice and easy step. So there you are, that's step 4, and step 4 with those C1 and C2 components, the D2, D3 and the C20 components, which are these 2 and the middle frame, and the Q9 and the Q14 components, which is these here. And again, just making sure you get the orientation of the parts right. Making sure you get the orientation of the top part, for example, this section here, make sure it's the same as the drawing. And yeah, so it's really quite easy step, no problem at all with that one. For step 5, we need some parts that we've already built in the previous steps, and step 5 is in 2 sections. So the brace members that we built in step 4, we're putting those onto the chassis rails, right and left. And the second section, we're popping in these bump stops onto the chassis. So I've got together all my parts into my session bowl, and all to my additional parts for the chassis as well. These sections here, for example, where we've got the MA26, which are these metal braces here. Got those 2, so we've got those as well, and it's a case of screwing these pieces together using BC2s, 6 of those, which will be for the second half, BB1s and BC3s. You need 21 of the BC3s, which are the 3x8mm, and 4 of the BB1s. So the BB1s are going to be along the top here, these top ones here into the rails. So you need to make sure you get those right, but the rest of the smaller ones attach the chassis brace members. So we're going to put that together. So here we are, step 5, and step 5, as you can see, from the drawing, from the shift servo at the front all the way to the rear, I've now popped all these into place. And you have to make sure that you put in also the F1 from the parts tree in the middle there, and a C2 here as well. So all the cross members are in, and the screws along the chassis are all tightened up. And I started sort of from the middle braces, cross members, and worked my way out to the ends of the chassis to get it nice and straight and tight. So now we're going to the second part, which is these section along the top. For the second part of step 5, we need to take the Y1 and Y2 parts here and here, and here and here, onto the chassis, and we need to make sure that you've got the orientation of them correctly, so that there's a little part where it overlaps the chassis, which I'll show you on here. So as you can see, you've got this little lip here and the little rubber stop bumps, and you need to pop a little bit of the thread lock carefully onto the BC3 screws and screw them into the chassis like so, and like so. And then further down, you then need to take the Z4 parts, and again there's a little lip. You need to make sure that little lip is on this side of the chassis, which I'll try and point here. It's a little lip. In other words, it runs along the chassis. So there, that's it. Those are in. So that's the second part of step 5 completed. For step 6, we need some more components from our bag. So we need, from the BB bag, we need 2 of these little 2x5mm screws. From the BA bag, we need 2 of the 3mm nuts. From our standard A bag, we need the 5x9mm ball end. We also need the 5mm connector as well, which is this one. We need the MA15s, which are these. We need the long shaft. We need the MA16 shaft. We need the MA17 shafts. So these are the longer shaft being sort of 91mm or so, this one being 42, and this one being 16mm long. And we're going to do some upgrades as we go along. We're going to take these out and put bearings in, because I've got bearings set, and the steering shaft, which is the MA20. And we also need components C6, we need component C16, C14, and C7. The case of putting this all together, quite a straightforward step. Don't need the grease because I'm changing mine to have bearings instead, so much better. So here we are with step 6, the component parts put together for our steering rod system. So the various steering arms are all done and in place, with the 91mm, the 28mm, and the 0.5mm, and the linkage system is all in place as well, with, in my case, 2 bearings, 1150 this end and an 850 at this end. So that's it, they're now done, nicely moved. Move on to step 7. So step 7, we're going to take our BA2s, which are the 3x12mm screws. I've got 4 here, and our BA3s, which are our 3x8mm screws. I've got 3 of those here. We're going to take our steering linkage and our B-arm, and we're going to install that with our steering servo onto the chassis in the places marked. So, quite an easy step to do. And here we have step 7 completed now, and you'll see here from the steps that we needed to put our servo onto our chassis. So you have to forgive me trying to get this all onto the camera. So our steering servo is in and located using the screws here and here and here onto the chassis, and our steering system onto the chassis, again using the slightly longer of the screws. I believe they are the BA2s, which are the slightly longer ones at 12 millimeters long, and they are in, and you now have the system at the right angle as well. So according to the drawing, you need to make sure that the ball ends were at 90 degrees, and the idea is 90 degrees. There we are, that's it. So that's that bit done. You can see the chassis, quite a big chassis. There you go, done. On to the next, that's bag A complete.